I'm Tess Knighton. I'm a musicologist, or I prefer to call myself a music historian. And I am living and working in Barcelona since 2011 as an ICREA Research Professor based at the Institució Milà i Fontanals of the CSIC in Barcelona. When I came to Barcelona, I began a new project with funding from the Marie Curie Foundation, which was called Urban Musics and Musical Practices in Early Modern Europe. And I spent a lot of time during this project researching in the different archives of the city, which are extremely rich in documentation from the Middle Ages onwards. And I really started to try to understand what the musical experience of the ordinary citizen of Barcelona might have been during what we could call the long 16th century, so from the end of the 15th century through into the beginning of the 17th century. This is a different kind of approach that has formed part of historical studies for some time, but has rarely really been studied as regards music history. Musicologists tend to look at musical scores and look at documentation to find out more information about musicians and composers in particular. But I wanted to know what the experience of a citizen in Barcelona might have been, what musical knowledge they might have had or not, so what kind of musical training, looking at both professional musicians and those citizens who had musical instruments in their houses, for example, how music related to the major institutions of the city, but not from studying those institutions so much in themselves, but looking how citizens related to, say, the cathedral, the larger parish churches, the civic institutions such as the town hall, and so on. And in order to do this, I carried out research in the Notarial Archive of Barcelona, looking at, in particular, three types of document. The wills of people, wills drawn up before they died, the inventories of their possessions when they died, and also contracts between different institutions and individuals and musicians, and also how musicians train through a system of contractual apprenticeship. So I gathered together a lot of data and related this to the idea of the soundscape of the city. Urban soundscape has been a study, a focus of study for some years now, probably about 25 or so, and but very often it's not done on the basis of this kind of bottom-up approach, looking at the daily lives of the citizens rather than looking down from the higher echelons of society, the elite of the city. Obviously that's a factor in the soundscape and one that I also study. But trying to understand really what the impact of sounds and musics of different kinds would be on the ordinary citizen in the street, in the church, in the home, in different acoustic spaces. And I realized that in order to do this, I needed to be able to work with and read the work of historians of all kinds, cultural historians, in the case of Barcelona, particularly the work of Albert Garcia Spuche, who has done very detailed studies, also based on notarial documents, of the different communities and the different neighbourhoods within the city. And trying to focus on sounds and on musics but without excluding the other senses, sense of smell, sense of sight, and so on, trying to reach some kind of holistic approach to understanding daily events in the city, regular events in the city, like maybe processions, urban ceremonial, repeated annually, and then what one might call, in the term of the time, extraordinary events, special events that only happened perhaps once or twice in the lifetime of a city. And I have tried to read very widely the works of historians of other kinds, and also became interested in a more social anthropological approach. And my talk today was about the work of Murray Schafer, and in particular of Barry Truax, who published his book Acoustic Communication in 1984, which was then reproduced in a second edition in 2001. So this is not new research, the idea of acoustic communication and the idea of an acoustic community. But it seems to have made some impact on musicological study, but not a great deal. And reading his book and trying to understand how his concepts might work in a historical sense, because of course he is talking about modern soundscapes and the experience of them, and in which field research can be carried out. Impossible to do, of course, for the 16th century to a great extent, but possible through other approaches and other methodologies, looking at different types of documentation and written sources, but also looking at iconographical sources, material objects, all kinds of things from the period which might actually help understand the role that sound had to play within the urban community, and its impact on the individuals who lived there. So today I was trying to elaborate on some of the points that Truax has made in his study. For example, an idea of acoustic competence, by which the different members of the community would, as it were, accumulate a certain amount of information from a very information-rich environment as to what sounds might mean, what they might tell us, and understand all of that in the context and the acoustic spaces within which the different sounds and different musics were heard and came to be associated. So I tried to match these concepts with some of the material that I have been analysing from the archives and from written texts of various kinds from the period, to try and enter more fully into the daily experience of sound in the city in the 16th century.